Guys, so today we're going to go through our notes for the Southwest region and westward expansion. So I'm going to go ahead and share this with you. Do your best to take notes. I'll point out some important dates and events that happen, and we'll have a quiz coming up on this. Nice thing about this section is there's only 4 states that you guys need to remember. So we've got Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Okay, and we're going to start off talking about westward expansion. So let me go ahead and share this with you. All right. So when we talk about this region, we are talking about from east to west, okay? Physical landscape, how do the physical features of the Western United States make the region unique, okay? What's different about the Southwest states that make it different from the Northeast and the Southeast? Okay, so the Mississippi River divides the United States into 2 different parts. Okay, these 2 regions are not equal in size. Okay, the area to the west of the Mississippi River is much larger than the area to the east. So you can see a map here. We've got the eastern United States and the western United States. Okay, thus far we've talked about the northern states, the northeast region, and the southeast region. Okay, and we're going to start looking at how people move across the Mississippi River into the western region. Okay. So all this happens, it's not necessarily presented to you in chronological order, okay? So we're going to talk about Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. We're also going to talk about the area of the Louisiana Purchase, the Oregon Treaty, okay? And then the Western United States, okay? So we'll go through each of those. In a few weeks, we'll backtrack, talk about the Midwest, and then we'll talk about the Western US states too. But for now, we're going to focus on westward expansion and these 4 states at the bottom, okay? So landforms in the Southwest. The Southwest has portions of Oklahoma and Texas that make up the southern portion of the Great Plains. Okay, New Mexico has a landscape very similar to Colorado with plains in the east, the Rocky Mountains in the central portion, and dry, arid deserts in the west. Okay, Arizona is known for its hot, dry weather. It's deserts and sandy grasslands. Okay, the Grand Canyon is also located in Arizona. Okay. All right, westward expansion. Why did people begin moving west? Okay, after the American Revolution, white Americans began exploring the West, which led to the Louisiana Purchase from France in 1803. Okay, that was a large portion of land. It actually doubled the size of the United States. Okay, you guys will see that on the map. All right. There was also the concept of manifest destiny. That was a idea that held that the United States had the right to extend its boundaries from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, this resulted in more westward expansion. So some people actually thought it was our destiny, that it was actually God's will that the United States expand. Okay. Mountain men also explored the region and traded with natives while trapping animals such as beavers, okay, which they sold those pelts. They would ship a lot of those things down the Mississippi River and into the Gulf of Mexico, where they would then transport those goods from the Gulf of Mexico back to Europe, okay? The Homestead Act. The Homestead Act, okay, gave pioneers land after they lived on it for 5 years, okay? Gold and silver were discovered. There was gold discovered in California. Colorado had its own gold rush, silver rush, and Alaska also has its own gold rush, okay? So those are some major reasons for westward expansion. And then, of course, the Transcontinental Railroad, okay? So let's look at each of these a little closer. Okay, westward expansion greatly affected the history of the region. The first people to live in the West were Native American tribes. Okay, so technically speaking, we had the Spanish that moved into the region in 1598. Okay, the Spanish moved from Mexico and southward. They moved to the north and began exploring and claiming more of those areas for Spain. Okay, so the Spanish were the first Europeans to arrive in the western region. In 1598, they began founding settlements. Spanish priests established missions or churches based in communities where they tried to convert Native Americans to Christianity and to Spanish culture. French explorers also explored and claimed lands west of the Mississippi. Okay, so we've got Native Americans, all right, and we've got Spanish in the west. Okay, and then west of the Mississippi, you have French trappers and traders, and France actually ends up claiming some of that region, which we consider the Louisiana Purchase, which we later buy from France in 1803. Okay, after the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, the land between the Mississippi and the Rocky Mountains now belonged to the United States. By the 1830s, some Americans believed in the concept of manifest destiny, that the United States had a right to control all or most of the North America from Atlantic to Pacific. This concept led to a push in westward expansion. Okay, so on this map here, you can see that large green area. That is the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, so it's almost doubling the size of the United States at that time. Okay, the Louisiana Purchase was purchased by President Thomas Jefferson from France in 1803. The French did not have a true sense of how much land they were given in trade and what resources there were on the land. It was approximately 827,000 square miles, and they bought it for 15 million US dollars. Okay, as a result of the deal, it was very profitable for the US. The most concerning problem the US faced was control of the port areas and transport of goods on the Mississippi River. Okay, as I stated before, a lot of the things that we made, grew, transported. A lot of people in the South used the Mississippi to transport goods from the Gulf of Mexico back to Europe. Okay, so purchasing the Louisiana Purchase, the Louisiana Territory, ensured that American export and trade possibilities were viable, and it was very vital that they kept the Spanish out of this area. Okay, so the Spanish currently, at this time in 1803, owned all that blue region you see on the map, okay, which is the Texas region, and the pink region up there, okay? Okay, Lewis and Clark. With the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, the land of the U.S. nearly doubled in size. Unaware of what was in the Northwest, Thomas Jefferson sent two explorers, Lewis and Clark, on an expedition from St. Louis, Missouri to the Oregon Territory. Okay, they were accompanied by a mountain man named Toussaint Charbonneau, who was hired as an Indian translator. Okay, he had a wife. His wife was Sacagawea. She was a Shoshone Indian. Okay, she proved to be more valuable in negotiating with the Indian tribes than he was. Okay, together they mapped the area and cataloged many plants and animals along their way. After Lewis and Clark made their expedition, the U.S. claimed the Oregon Territory as well. The only problem is that Great Britain had also claimed this land. Okay, so this is the Oregon Territory. It's basically Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and this was in 1846. We began to have a little bit of this issue with Great Britain, and the US said, we own it, and Great Britain said the same. So we came up with the Oregon Treaty. The Oregon Treaty is a treaty between the United Kingdom, or Great Britain, England, right, and the United States that was signed on June 15th, 1846. This treaty brought an end to the Oregon boundary by settling competing American and British claims to the area, which had been jointly occupied by both Britain and the U.S. since the Treaty of 1818. Okay, so what did Great Britain actually gain out of this? Well, Great Britain ends up owning the area north of our border here, okay, in Canada. All right, so that became British territory, and we took Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Okay. All right. So the Oregon Trail, I like this map here. Shows some pretty cool things. So if you look here, you see a green dotted line that goes from south to north. This is the Rocky Mountains. Okay. And the Rocky Mountains travel all the way up into Canada. Okay. You'll see some physical features and the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail started here in Independence, Missouri. Okay, and it followed all the way through Kansas, Nebraska, north through all these states and up into Oregon. Okay, all the way up to near Mount Hood. All right. So, what is the Oregon Trail? Well, the Oregon Trail was a route that was traveled by missionaries in 1834. Okay, a merchant named Nathan Wythe led the first missionary group. Okay, missionaries were a religious group. Okay, where they built an outpost in what we call Idaho today. Okay, there was another man named Marcus Whitman. Okay, he was determined to spread Christianity to American Indians on the frontier. Okay, he was a doctor and Protestant missionary. He set out on horseback from the Northeast in 1835 to prove that the Westward Trail to Oregon could be traversed safely and further than ever before. Okay, on his second expedition, Whitman headed west again. He met up with a huge wagon train destined for Oregon. The group included 120 wagons, about 1,000 people, and thousands of livestock. Okay, cattle, sheep, whatever animals they took with them. Their trek began on May 22nd and it lasted for 5 months. Okay, it effectively opened the floodgates of pioneer migration along the Oregon Trail and became known as the Great Emigration of 1843. Okay, so when I was a kid, we played this game called Oregon Trail. It was on the old Apple computers, and it was a lot of fun. But the challenge of getting through this game was based on real life. They had to find food, they had to cross rivers, they had to survive Indian attacks. There was a lot of things going on. They had to cross the Rocky Mountains. Okay, so this was a very, very difficult and treacherous journey for these people. And you can imagine they were basically doing this in horse-drawn wagons or with oxen. Okay, and a lot of them had young families, kids. So this was a very tedious thing that they had to accomplish. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Native Americans. Okay. At the beginning of the 1830s, nearly 125,000 Native Americans lived on millions of acres of land in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, and Florida. Okay, that's the region we call the Southeast, right? Okay, land their ancestors had occupied and cultivated for many generations. By the end of the decade, very few Native Americans remained anywhere in the Southeast United States. What happened? Well, the federal government forced those that did not assimilate to leave their homelands and walk thousands of miles to a specially designated Indian territory across the Mississippi River. Okay, this is what we currently call the state of Oklahoma. All right. This was a difficult, sometimes deadly journey, and it's called the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears is over 5,043 miles long, and it covers 9 states: Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. Okay, so assimilation. Basically, what happened is Andrew Jackson, okay, became president, and he thought that Native Americans, like a lot of Americans at that time, he thought they were all savages, okay? We know that's not really true. They had their own forms of government. They had their own communities. They had a way of life that they had kept for many generations. Um, what had happened is, as the United States began to expand, they wanted to claim these territories for um, southward expansion. So, in order to do that, they decided they had to move the Indians out of those areas. Okay, so they forced them to assimilate. In other words, they tried to get them to learn to be like the European um, uh, colonists and things, right? So they wanted them to be Americans and speak English. They wanted them to go to schools like we did. Okay, they wanted them to learn the American way of life, and if they did not, then they basically forced them out of the area. Okay, so really, really sad thing. They were pushed into Oklahoma, which at the time they felt like Oklahoma was kind of a barren, useless piece of land where it wasn't going to be good for farming or anything like that. They figured Oklahoma was far enough away across the Mississippi that they could push them out and not have to worry about dealing with Native Americans anymore. Okay. So in 1860, okay, President Lincoln becomes the president, right? Okay, we know that in 1860 we had Civil War because President Lincoln wanted to free the slaves, right? Okay, well, in 1862, President Lincoln also signed what we call the Homestead Act. This encouraged Western migration by providing settlers 160 acres of public land. In exchange, the homesteaders paid a small filing fee and were required to complete 5 years of continuous residence before receiving ownership of the land. In other words, if you wanted to move west of the Mississippi, okay, they were giving away land, 160 acres for free. Okay, the only requirement was that you had to establish a home there and live there for 5 years. Okay, so as many people were fighting in the Civil War, okay, this is one way near the end of the Civil War that they could encourage people to expand the United States. President Lincoln also believed in manifest destiny, and this is one way he got people to move in that direction. Okay. So here we see our map again. You see the Louisiana Purchase in white. Okay, that's across the Mississippi River, west of the Mississippi. Okay, we still have the Spanish-owned territories, okay, in the blue and in the pink there, all right? And then up at the top here in the yellow, you can see the Oregon Treaty, Oregon territory that we claimed and settled with Great Britain on, okay? So now the United States is this brown area, the white area, and the yellow area up here, okay? All right, so these are the 4 states we're going to focus on. Number 1 being Arizona, 2 being New Mexico, 3 Texas, and 4 Oklahoma. Texas has that very distinct shape, almost kind of makes like a T shape, right? Oklahoma is very distinct in that it's kind of shaped like a pan or a pot. Okay, we usually call this region the Panhandle. All right, and then we've got New Mexico, which is directly south of Colorado. Colorado would be right up here, and then Arizona. Okay. Climate of the Southwest. The Southwest is known for its desert terrains and temperatures that reach high into the 100-degree range regularly, along with mildly low temperatures in the winter. There is little precipitation in many of these areas, and it's typically dry. Okay. Oklahoma sees some winter weather, definitely. Parts of Texas, for sure. New Mexico gets weather very similar to ours in the northern region, especially across the Rocky Mountains. Okay. But Arizona and most of southern and western Texas are very dry. Okay. Like desert. Okay. Oklahoma. Let's talk a little bit about Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a diverse area which has several American Indian reservations located within it. Okay, as many Indians moved to this region during the Southeast expansion by colonists, it became an area where they settled into different groups, different tribes in Oklahoma, and expanded into Colorado and New Mexico. Okay, today people from all backgrounds live in Oklahoma. This area is somewhat of a crossroads for many cultures as people settled there during westward expansion. Okay, so you had the natives there first, and you had some Spanish there, and then you had more French and European colonists that began moving that direction. Okay, today we have a lot of different groups that live there. Oklahoma City is kind of a business hub for a lot of large corporations. These are global corporations. So if you go to Oklahoma City, for instance, you'll see that they have Chinese, African American, Anglo, all different types of people, Spanish. It's really a culturally diverse area. Okay. Oklahoma is also located in an area that we consider Tornado Alley. Okay, Tornado Alley expands from Nebraska and Kansas and then into Oklahoma. It's well known because the amount of tornadoes that they see. So tornadoes are caused by hot air meeting with cold air, and which causes this vortex of swirling wind, right? Tornadoes are pretty dangerous. They're unpredictable. And you guys have seen video of tornadoes where we see the destruction that they can cause. All right. All right. Most of Oklahoma was set aside as Indian territory before the Civil War as a result of the Indian removal in the Southeast. Okay. It was opened for general settlement around 1890. Okay, this is about 30 years after the Civil War. Okay, and we had a group called the Sooners. What they did is they moved into the territory before the government said that they could. Okay, they kind of jumped the gun on this, and because you had the Native Americans that lived there, this was an upsetting event. It caused a lot of skirmishes. Okay, so those people that moved into that region too soon are known as the Sooners. Okay, if you are familiar with the University of Oklahoma, that is their mascot, the Sooners. Okay, Oklahoma was generally known as a poor ranching and farming state, but eventually oil was discovered and provided new wealth for the region. So as oil was discovered, more and more people wanted to move into the region in Oklahoma. On November 16th, 1907, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the proclamation that established Oklahoma as the nation's 46th state. Okay, this is a little unusual because this is one of the late states to be added to the United States, even though we had already expanded our territory greatly by 1907. We owned all the territory from coast to coast at that point, except Oklahoma hadn't been claimed as an actual state until 1907. Part of the reason for that is because the smaller population of people that lived there. Also, it was known as an Indian territory. Okay, by claiming this as an actual state, at that point, they had moved most of those Indians into reservations, smaller plots of land that were reserved just for Native Americans. Okay. All right, Texas. Okay, let's talk about a little bit about Texas. Texas, okay, was owned by the Spanish, right? Okay, Spanish owned Mexico and the territory north, which was Texas, part of Colorado, part of Oklahoma, and they owned all those states out west: New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and California. Okay, in 1810, okay, Mexico had its independence from Spain. In other words, they celebrate Cinco de Mayo, which is their independence, and they gained Mexican independence from Spain. So now all those territories, Texas, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and California, now those were owned by Mexico. Okay. So as Texas began to expand, we had more settlers that started to move into the area of Texas. This caused some problems with the Mexicans, so they end up having this battle. Okay, there's a famous battle at the Alamo. Okay, this was a battle of 6,000 Mexican men against some of those settlers, and that happened in 1836. Okay, the rebels or settlers that were in that region had some help from a man named Sam Houston and his militia. Okay, they end up winning that territory in 1836, and Texas becomes its own independent nation. Okay, what's interesting about that is Texas then writes up its own Declaration of Independence. Okay, it tries to establish a government, but because you have so many different people and such a big territory, it was hard for them to establish all of that. They didn't have the money to make all of that happen. And by 1845, okay, Texas and the regions in Colorado and Oklahoma, they become part of the United States. Okay, the Texas territory included all of Texas, portions of Oklahoma, Colorado, and New Mexico. Let's take a look back at our map here, guys. Just want to show you that. Okay, so if you look at this region, you've got in blue here, you've got all of Texas, you've got the Oklahoma Panhandle, a little bit of Kansas, a little bit of Colorado, and a little bit of New Mexico. What's interesting is if you look at Colorado, you can see in the southeast region, this is where Pueblo would be. Okay, and there's a significant boundary here between the Louisiana Purchase in white and the Texas Territory in blue. Okay, this line here is actually the Arkansas River. Okay, so Pueblo is located on the Arkansas River. Interesting fact, but at one point all this was owned by Spain. Okay, then in 1810, all this became Mexican territory, part of Mexico. Okay, and then in 1836, you had the Texas revolt for Texas independence. So Colorado and anything south of the Arkansas River, which is portions of Pueblo County, okay, that became part of Texas, all right? And then in 1845, Colorado becomes part of the United States, okay? We still had this region in pink that was divided by the Rocky Mountains here, okay? That was still Mexican-owned territory in 1845, okay? So naturally, owning the Northeast, the Southeast, the Midwest, the Louisiana Purchase, the Texas annexation, and the Oregon territory, we wanted to expand into this pink area. So in 1846, we have the Mexican-American War, okay? So the Mexican-American War followed the Texas annexation for control of states to the west in 1846 through 1848, okay? All right, so people of the Southwest, so obviously we've got some very different cultures here. We know from looking at the Transcontinental Railroad that we had Chinese that helped to build the railroad. We had freed African Americans, okay? We had French trappers and traders in the area. We had Mexican citizens, we had American settlers, and of course, Native Americans. So the West is pretty diverse, but it depends on where you're at. So we've got concentrations of people of Hispanic descent in New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona. Okay, Utah saw some settlements from missionaries. Okay, Mormons settled in some of those areas in Utah. We had Native Americans that settled all throughout the Southwest. Okay, and of course, with the gold rush in California, you end up seeing Chinese and French and all different people. Okay, so it's a very, very diverse area. So hopefully that'll help you guys with your notes, okay? We'll get prepared for the test. You can practice your Quizlets, and I will catch up with you guys soon, all right? Hope you enjoy your day. Bye.